The recently discovered video provides information about the investigation into Nick's family's murder. The terrifying sequences feature Ryan, Taylor, Alex, and Nick, the four buddies who were with each other before the horrible event. Detectives question each teen to obtain information, but contradictions raise questions about Nick's role and the real reason behind the crime. By introducing himself as Dave rather than using his official titles, Detective Dave starts a conversation with Ryan that is more casual and less formal. Ryan states that he is doing fine and confirms that he is Ryan. Ryan's presence is appreciated, and Dave recognizes that it has been a hard night. He gathers Ryan's first and last names, which are Fingles. Ryan is a minor, so Dave wants to make sure he feels at ease and knows his rights during the chat. A second detective walks into the room where Taylor Tewksbury, 15 years old, is being questioned. Taylor's apparent anxiety is understandable in his circumstance. The detective, who introduces themselves as a homicide detective, stresses the seriousness of the circumstances that have arisen and encourages Taylor to be entirely truthful. Taylor gets asked by the investigator to give a thorough description of their day's events and the people he interacted with. Taylor explains how they had spent the previous night at Ryan's place, and he describes being with Ryan, Alex, and Nick. When questioned about their arrival time, Taylor explains that their mother drove them to Ryan's house at roughly 2:50 p.m., after initially dropping them off at home. Taylor's readiness to go off into detail and their participation in the conversation give the interview a sincere feel. The investigator keeps asking questions about what's happening at Ryan's residence. Around 10:15 p.m., Taylor recalls playing lacrosse, playing computer games, and watching the films Robin Big and Accepted before everyone fell asleep. Ryan's parents were there at home, according to Taylor, who also emphasizes that they were in the main living room. Alexander Smith is assured he is not in trouble by the detective before they begin their interrogation. Alexander acknowledges that his last name is Smith when the investigator asks him about it. Alexander is told by the investigator that he spoke to his father there and that he will see to it that the other guys get where they're going. Alexander denies having any further names or street identities when the detective inquires about them. Alexander replies yes when the detective asks if he plays lacrosse at Delaney. The detective builds trust with Alexander by asking simple questions and conversing in a non-threatening manner. Nick Browning appears to fall asleep while waiting. In an effort to build trust and inform the victim of the ongoing inquiry, the detective enters the room and apologizes for the delay. The investigator casually converses with Nick after reading him his Miranda rights and making sure he understands them in order to avoid hesitancy or a request for legal counsel. Nick is then asked to recount the prior day and a half's events beginning with a previous afternoon. Nick talks about getting home from school, debating skipping a basketball game and hanging out at Ryan's house, where he played Xbox. Nick mentions Ryan's location as being in the Springdale area. The investigators keep looking for answers about the horrible killing of Nick's family as emotions grow and new information comes to light. The video offers insight into the problematic interrogation procedure and the legal complexity of the case. The kids' testimonies contain contradictions that the police must deal with, casting suspicion on their participation and the circumstances leading up to the tragedy. The detectives carefully extract additional information with each encounter to build trust and compile the necessary information. The inquiry becomes more intense as the investigators piece together the timeline of events and work to comprehend Nick's carryout and the reason for the horrible crime. Each new piece of information reveals more of a hidden evil that underlies everyday life, bringing them closer to the truth. The officers point out Nick's actions in the police station, such as his unconcerned attitude and relaxed demeanor, implying that these reveal an ignorant attitude and a disregard for the seriousness of the circumstance. They suggest that he acts with entitlement and disrespect for the established order. To get Nick to confess, the investigators used a variety of tactics. He was informed that his pals had informed him that his father was upset, pointed out his lies while displaying a family picture to him. They even questioned his concern for what others thought of him, but none of it was effective. He was then handcuffed and arrested to intimidate him. In the hopes that he would become anxious and confess, they left him alone. Nick fell asleep at this period, which was uncomfortable given the situation he was in. He was awakened after around 40 minutes by the sound of the door. The detective tried to reassure Nick but he was uneasy, running a hand through his hair. Nick's inappropriate smile, though, hinted that he was not sorry. Finally, the detective informed Nick that they could sense his concern and inquired about the incident to get a confession. Nick started nodding, hinting at the possibility of admission. The investigator approached, maintaining eye contact and speaking compassionately to Nick to get to Nick to tell the truth, as he sensed the potential for a breakthrough. Nick, a Boy Scout trained to become a Life Scout, made a terrifying revelation about his traumatic upbringing, which included claims of physical and mental abuse from a strict father. He recalled an instance when, due to his attitude, his father became enraged at a leadership weekend campout, leading to a fight in which his father punched him. The policeman questions Nick about what happened. Nick explains that he went up to his sleeping father and stood next to him for about 30 minutes. He admits that he considered putting a gun to his father's head, but resisted doing so. Nick makes it clear that he didn't intend to murder his father that evening, but the opportunity presented itself when he saw the gun nearby and his father falling asleep. The actions may have been spontaneous or planned, but based on Nick's statement, it appears that he may have taken advantage of an opportunity on the spur of the moment. He acknowledges that he is unsure whether he purposely pulled the trigger or if it was an accident. Nick goes on to say that after the initial act, he panicked and believed his mother was going to come downstairs. He's not sure if she awoke or noticed anything, though. Nick waited on the couch while experiencing stress. He took a time to think about what he was doing, then shot his mother while she was still sleeping. Before he shot her, he acknowledged that she briefly woke up before going back to sleep. This information eliminates any basis for the crimes because both parents were innocent, defenseless victims. When questioned about why he killed his siblings, Nick says he was out of it and no one was present to challenge what he says. He admits that fear played a role in his choice, demonstrating a self-serving mentality. Nick's lack of regret for the planned murder of his brothers exposes his cold-bloodedness. His acts imply a wish to get rid of any witnesses who might implicate him or remember his arguments with his father. Without thinking about the long-term effects of his horrible actions, Nick believed that killing his family would solve his difficulties. This was a misguided belief that he had. The detectives were left reeling from the unexpected confession, which increased their drive to look for supporting evidence, including the whereabouts of the murder weapon. The investigator questions Nick during the interview about what he did with the Xbox and the jewelry. Nick admits to opening the jewelry box, spilling part of it, and moving the Xbox and Wii on the pool table. Nick mentions throwing a gun on the side of the road when questioned about leaving the residence. Nick acknowledges that he was so confused that he wouldn't have noticed if someone were standing right there when the investigator asked if he observed any neighbors or people outside. The investigator promises Nick that additional information will be revealed later. They talk about getting in touch with Nick's grandpa and aunt, but Nick is at a loss for words. Nick accepts the detective's offer to bring him a soda, but he wants a Coke. Despite the seriousness of his confession, the detective is friendly to him and provides him a jumpsuit to change into. The scenario begins to hit home for Nick as he wears the jumpsuit. Even though Nick's allegations of abuse throughout his life were unproven, he ultimately accepted an agreement to plead guilty in January of 2009. He was given 4 life sentences after entering a guilty plea to all 4 first-degree murder charges. Whether the killings were spontaneous, as Nick said, or planned, as officials assumed, is still debatable. Nick will be available for parole in 2031, after spending 23 years and serving 2 consecutive life sentences. But because of Maryland's stringent parole clearance process, which hasn't granted parole since 1994, his chances of being released are distant. The tragic case of Nick serves as an example of the complex factors that can contribute to violent acts. It emphasizes the value of early intervention and support for anyone facing abuse or mental health issues. To stop future occurrences of such tragic events, it is essential that law enforcement and society as a whole work toward a deeper understanding of these underlying problems. Thank you for watching this video. Consider subscribing to our channel for more videos if you liked it. To keep up with our most recent videos, remember to click the notification button.